Welcome to the Smarter Money Life podcast powered by Forum Credit Union, your go-to podcast for all things personal finance, where we break down complex financial concepts into simple, actionable steps. Whether you're looking to save more, invest wisely, or plan for your future, we've got you covered. Join us each episode as we bring you expert insights, real-life stories, and practical tips to help you live a smarter money life. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Smarter Money Life podcast. I'm your host, Andy Mattingly, and today we're going to talk about preparing for retirement. This is a little sobering statistic that I want to share. A staggering 80% of the population is still not adequately prepared for retirement. Now, about a third depend entirely on Social Security. If you're in your 50s or 60s, do you feel ready for retirement? Do you in your 30s and 40s and want to make sure when you get to your 50s and 60s that you're prepared for retirement? So here are some questions that you need to ask yourself regardless of what age you are, and I'm going to explain why it's important. So it starts with, how much money will you need? So you kind of have to start by taking an assessment of where you are financially and where you need to be. And how much money do you want to have live comfortably in retirement? Inflation adjusted, do you think you need $75,000 or $150,000 per year or more or less? So you don't want to have to postpone retirement because you need to make adjustments. What you want to do is start putting together how much money you're going to need, regardless of what age you are, so you can retire when you want with the amount of money that you want. Now, have you tackled debts and major expenses? If you're in your 50s, these are some of the things you want to do before you retire, is pay off a lot of your major debts, tackle most of your major expenses that you may have in the house that you're going to live in, and make sure that you're not putting off any costly repairs. And then also make sure you're planning for those. If you're younger, this is when you need to think about, well, what debts do I want to really take on? Because that's just going to distract from how much money you're going to have to save for retirement or for other savings. Now, have you evaluated your medical insurance coverage? Now, if you're 50s and 60s, you need to decide how much that any government-sponsored insurance is going to cover. But then you also may have things like dental and vision. So you might want to talk to someone about how these government-sponsored programs and private insurance programs will fit in and what it's going to cost for you. Now, if you're younger, you also want to look at your current insurance plans and say, can I cover a little bit higher deductible so that I can start putting money into a health savings account? Because if you put the money into the health savings account, you can use it later so that you can pay for expenses in retirement. So if you can do that, that's something that you should be thinking about. Another good question is, should you consolidate retirement accounts? Now, if you're in your 50s or 60s, you may have 3 or 4 401ks at different companies because you've moved around. So you want to make sure that as you change your jobs, that you don't neglect those 401ks and you start putting them together in one plan that can be managed. And so, you're going to have to do some rollovers, and it does require you to make sure you're following all of the IRS guidelines for how you do those rollovers. But if you work with a professional, they will help you do that. Now, here's another thing. Do you rebalance your portfolio and remember to diversify? It's so important to adhere to the principle of diversification and also to rebalance your portfolio at the end of the year. If you've been in a 401k plan 5 years or 35 years, if you've never rebalanced your portfolio, your intended asset allocation or diversification is probably off. So this is something you need to do regardless of your age to prepare for retirement. And finally, are you maxing out your retirement accounts? When you have your retirement accounts, you want to take full advantage of any employer-sponsored accounts. And, that's starting with getting the match. But it's also important that if you're over 40, you can do increased or catch-up contribution into your plans. So that's very important. The other thing, though, is even when you're younger, you want to be able to put in as much money as you can. So you want to be in that 10 to 15% range. Now, another question to ask yourself is, have you started planning for emergencies that might arise when you're retired? And what this means is that you need to also have an emergency fund for when you're retired. So are you putting some money away that isn't in your savings that you're going to use for income, because your retirement savings is about generating income for yourself when you're in retirement. But you also should start putting some other money away that's not in a tax advantage or retirement account, but just in another investment account or in a high yield savings or something like that, so that you have access to cash if there's something big that you need to do that you don't have to pull away from money that's kind of be your income. So that's another important thing. And then the final thing is, at least by the time you're in your 40s, if not sooner, but definitely when you're in your 50s, are you working with a financial professional that can help you manage and build your plan and look at what you have so that you can make adjustments? If you're doing these things all along with a professional, you're going to have a better chance of achieving the retirement that you want, being able to retire at the time that you want. Because the worst thing that can happen to you is that you're ready to retire, but realize that you're going to have to work another 2 or 5 years because you've not answered all of these questions. And if you're answering all these questions and thinking about the future when you're in your 30s and your 40s, it makes it a lot easier in your 50s and 60s because you'll have less things to tackle. So these are just a few of the questions and moves that you need to make if you want to have your best retirement possible. And remember, you may be in your 30s listening to this and say, well, this doesn't pertain to me, but it actually does, because it'll make your life a lot easier, and you can almost be on autopilot when you get to your 50s and 60s and really can pick the day that you want to retire, because that's all what we're trying to do our whole life, is preparing for the time when we can have vocational freedom, meaning we can do whatever we want and we don't have to depend upon having a job for income because we saved enough money to have the income we need in retirement. So prepare for retirement now so that you can retire when you want. That's all for this episode of the Smarter Money Life podcast. Thank you for joining me. I hope you found our discussion helpful and inspiring. You can find more resources on the Smarter Money Life page at forumcu.com. Remember, making smart financial decisions is a journey, and every step you take brings you closer to your financial dream. Be sure to tune in next time for more tips and insights on managing your money. Until then, stay smart and financially savvy.